The galaxy had long been ruled by the Tenebri Dominion, an empire spanning thousands of star systems. For centuries, they had crushed rebellious species, assimilated others, and annihilated those who resisted. Their vast fleets, armed with weapons that could break planets, ensured that no race dared challenge their dominion. They had exterminated civilizations older and wiser than humanity, reducing their homeworlds to silence, their histories to dust. They were feared, unchallenged, and absolute. Then they found Earth. It was a backwater world, barely worth a footnote in the annals of galactic history. Humanity had not yet developed faster-than-light travel, had barely begun to explore beyond its own moon. To the Tenebri, this species was primitive, still trapped in its own gravity well, still warring with itself over petty territorial squabbles. Their technology was laughable, their biology was unimpressive, bipedal, weak, fragile. They were nothing. A single Dominion fleet, the Sovereign Hand, was sent to claim Earth. Hundreds of black warships, each the size of a city, emerged from the void and cast their shadows over the blue planet. The transmission was simple and absolute. There was no room for negotiation, no room for mercy. Surrender your world, kneel before the Dominion, serve, or be eradicated. There was silence for several hours, and the Tenebri commander, High Lord Vazir, assumed they were debating how best to submit. It was always the same. Every lesser race tried to fight at first. It was the same defiance that burned in all dying species, a pathetic, final spark before the darkness claimed them. Then came humanity's answer. Across the planet, missile silos opened their steel maws, and from them death erupted. Hundreds of nuclear warheads launched into the sky, their contrails painting streaks of defiance across the heavens. From secret orbital platforms, railgun turrets fired tungsten rods at near-light speeds, striking Dominion warships with such force that entire decks imploded before their shields could react. Laser satellites, weapons humanity was not supposed to possess, carved into the fleet's hulls with white-hot precision. The Dominion fleet had come expecting a culling. Instead, they bled. Explosions rocked the void. For the first time in their long, unbroken history of conquest, the Dominion lost ships to a pre-FTL race. It was unthinkable. The Sovereign Hand had crushed civilizations, spanning hundreds of worlds, had reduced fleets to wreckage, had fought wars against races far more advanced than this. But this was something else. Vazir ordered a full retreat. His fleet had suffered more losses in a single planetary assault than it had in the last 5 campaigns combined. It was not because humanity had superior weapons. It was not because they had greater numbers. It was because they fought like no other species had before. No mercy, no hesitation, no surrender. That was humanity's first mistake. The Dominion never forgave defiance. A year later, they returned, not with a fleet, but an armada. 10,000 warships entered the Sol system. They did not issue a warning. There would be no negotiation. Earth would burn. The bombardment began without ceremony. Kinetic strikes hammered the planet first, vaporizing cities in an instant. Swarms of Dominion biodrones descended like locusts, stripping the land of all life, leaving only skeletal remains and ashes. In the first week, 1 billion people died. In the second, 2 billion more. The survivors huddled in underground bunkers, watching their world die in fire and shadow. The Tenebri landed next. Their soldiers, the Warborn, towered over humans, their 6 armed forms covered in living armor that shifted and grew with their every movement. Their weapons fired pulses of matter-disrupting energy that reduced flesh and bone to nothing. They swept through the ruins, slaughtering anyone they found. The invasion was supposed to be over within a month. But humanity did not die quietly. In the wreckage of fallen cities, survivors gathered. They scavenged weapons from the dead. They modified Dominion technology, turning their enemies' own tools against them. Civilians became soldiers, soldiers became monsters. Humanity did not fight for survival alone. They fought for revenge. They learned to adapt. Dominion soldiers relied on their advanced targeting systems, so humanity deployed electromagnetic pulses that scrambled their sensors. Dominion officers wore unbreakable armor, so humans devised chemical weapons that corroded it from within. They poisoned Dominion rations. They hijacked enemy ships and crashed them into their own fleets. They became the stuff of nightmares. The Dominion had expected resistance. They had not expected a war of extermination waged against them. By the end of the second year, the Tenebri High Command made an unprecedented decision. They left, not because they had been defeated, not because they could not crush what remained of humanity. They left because the cost of eradicating them had become too high. Every occupied city became a slaughterhouse. Every soldier deployed to the surface never returned. Every Tenebri victory was drowned in oceans of their own dead. But humanity did not celebrate. There was nothing left to celebrate. Earth was ruined, its skies choked with ash, its oceans blackened with oil and blood. The survivors did not see themselves as victors. They saw themselves as something else entirely. The war had changed them. They were no longer the species that had once gazed at the stars with wonder. They were something new, something broken, something hungry. Survivors gathered in the ruins of former governments and forged a single doctrine. They would not rebuild Earth. They would not remain in the ashes licking their wounds. They would make the Tenebri pay. Humanity did not waste time. They scavenged what technology remained. Scientists once bound by ethics and laws experimented freely. Genetic modifications turned soldiers into superhuman warriors. Cybernetic implants gave them strength beyond their bodies. Artificial intelligences, once feared, were unleashed without restraint. They took Dominion warships and remade them in their image. Faster, deadlier, built for nothing but war. They did not seek peace. They did not ask for mercy. They only wanted vengeance. Within a decade, the first human fleets left the Sol system. They struck hard and without warning. Entire Dominion colonies, planets that had stood untouched for thousands of years, burned in a single night. Human weapons left no survivors. Their warships broadcast no messages, only silent warnings in the form of planetary husks drifting in the void. The galaxy took notice. The species that had once been seen as insignificant had become a force of annihilation. The whispers spread across the stars. The humans were coming. The Dominion, once the unchallenged rulers of the cosmos, began to fracture. Other subjugated species saw what humanity had done. They saw the downfall of their masters. They saw the fire that had been set in the dark, and they rose up. Rebellions erupted across the Dominion. Planets long enslaved tore down the statues of their conquerors, executed their overseers, and sent their fleets to join the human war machine. The Tenebri fought desperately to maintain control, but it was too late. The fire had spread too far. The stars burned with the flames of insurrection. But humanity did not stop. They hunted the Tenebri to the last world. They found their homeworld, Velkar Prime, and unleashed horrors that the Dominion had never imagined. Bioweapons turned their seas into acid. Nanite plagues stripped entire continents to dust. Cybernetic monstrosities, once human, stalked their cities, killing without hesitation. The Tenebri, once the greatest empire the galaxy had known, were reduced to nothing but a dying whisper. The last Dominion emperor, once a god among his people, knelt before a human warlord in the ruins of his palace. His 6 eyes, once filled with arrogance, now held only terror. He did not beg for his life. He knew there was no mercy left in the universe. Humanity had become what they feared most. And when the last Tenebri choked on their own blood, when their empire was nothing but ruins and echoes, the galaxy trembled. Because they knew. They knew that the humans were no longer the hunted. They were the predators. The galaxy had long since become a graveyard for the enemies of the Tenebri Dominion. For centuries, their fleets had swept across the stars like a plague, obliterating any race that dared to resist them. From the moment they first set their eyes on the fertile systems and star-studded expanses of the galaxy, they had ruled with an iron fist. Their technological superiority was unmatched. Their war machines were unstoppable. The Dominion had swallowed up entire civilizations, not only conquering their worlds but erasing them from existence. One by one, systems fell under their ironclad rule. No one had ever dared to question the Tenebri. They were an unstoppable force, a tide of destruction that rolled across the cosmos. Then they found Earth. At first, it was nothing more than a primitive, unremarkable planet. It was stuck in the galactic backwaters, a young species fighting wars over borders that seemed trivial to anyone with a modicum of technological understanding. The humans had barely learned to harness the power of the atom when the Dominion set its sights on them. To the Tenebri, Earth was just another star to conquer, just another species to add to their list of subjugated worlds. They expected no resistance, no fight. After all, humanity was just beginning to crawl out of the Dark Ages, still battling its own wars and grappling with primitive technologies. The fleet arrived in the Sol system with all the arrogance that only millennia of unchecked conquest could breed. The Sovereign Hand, a flagship of the Tenebri Dominion, led the assault. Its sleek obsidian hull glimmered as it carved through the void with precision and authority. The communications were simple, as was expected from a species that had no time for diplomacy or negotiation. The message was cold, calculated. Surrender your world. Kneel before the Dominion. Serve, or be eradicated. To the Tenebri, this was the routine. The usual threats, the usual panic, the usual submission. The humans would have no choice but to accept their fate. They would either fall in line or perish. Either way, the Dominion would claim their world and add it to their ever-growing empire. There was no room for discussion. The Tenebri had already decided Earth's fate. What they did not anticipate was the response from humanity. At first, the Dominion fleet saw nothing but the lights of Earth. It was a blue and green sphere full of life but no threat. But then, something unexpected happened. Humanity did not bow to the inevitable. They fought back. From their military bases, hidden deep beneath their world's crust, missiles erupted into the sky. Warheads filled the air, each one aimed at the invading fleet. The missiles were crude, old technology by Dominion standards, but they packed the punch of desperation. Earth's resistance was not about to go quietly into the dark night. The first strike hit its target. Fleets of Tenebri warships erupted into chaos as humanity's projectiles collided with them, tearing through their outer shields. In orbit, the humans had a backup plan. Satellites, old scavenged relics from crashed alien ships, fired high-powered laser beams cutting deep into the hulls of the fleet. Even though the Dominion's warships were equipped with highly advanced shield systems, they had not anticipated a direct strike from a species they had written off as primitive. Human ingenuity came into play. Engineers had reverse-engineered alien technology in secret, studying every wreck that had fallen to Earth's surface over the decades. The warheads were a result of that work. Imperfect, sure, but lethal enough to damage the Tenebri ships. Humanity had proven its worth in that first fight. The Tenebri fleet, though still massive and overwhelmingly powerful, found itself wounded for the first time. However, the Dominion was not one to take such an insult lightly. Vazir, the High Lord of the Tenebri, issued the order to retreat, but it was not born out of fear. It was a calculated decision. The Dominion would return, more powerful than before. And when they did, there would be no more resistance. The humans were a fluke, nothing more than an annoying pest that had struck the wrong hornet's nest. But the Tenebri underestimated humanity's resolve. A year later they returned. The Dominion's armada arrived in full force. This time they did not make the mistake of underestimating their prey. They were not coming for a simple conquest anymore. They had a singular goal: complete annihilation. Earth would burn. Humanity would be eradicated. They began their assault the moment they entered the Sol system, releasing their full fury upon the planet. Waves of bombardment struck the surface of Earth, eradicating entire cities in seconds. Humans had no time to prepare. The first onslaught obliterated millions, leaving nothing but ash in its wake. The sky itself turned black as smoke rose from the charred remains of the world's capitals. The Tenebri unleashed a torrent of kinetic weapons, sending objects the size of moons hurtling toward Earth. Each strike left behind a crater the size of a continent, consuming everything in its path. What the Dominion didn't expect, however, was how quickly humanity adapted. While the Tenebri were confident that Earth's military infrastructure was primitive and unprepared, they didn't account for the sheer tenacity of human will. As Earth burned, those who remained, civilians, soldiers, scientists, banded together. The survivors took whatever technology they could salvage and used it against their invaders. Earth's military-industrial complex, once disjointed and inefficient, became a singular force bent on retaliation. Scavengers found broken alien warships, disassembled them, and rebuilt what they could. Engineers reverse-engineered Dominion weaponry and turned it into tools of mass destruction. Human resistance cells rose from the ruins of fallen cities. They learned quickly, adapting to the alien threat. Soon they were launching guerrilla strikes against the Tenebri, hacking into their communication systems, stealing their weapons, and executing sabotage missions behind enemy lines. The Dominion had not expected such coordinated resistance. They had thought humanity would fold, that they would crumble under the sheer force of the invasion. But they were wrong. What the Tenebri didn't realize was that humanity's greatest strength lay not in its technology, but in its spirit. The human race had been forged in adversity, tempered by centuries of warfare, division, and destruction. They were not a species to lie down and die quietly. They were the ones who fought to survive, no matter the odds. In the second year of the war, the Tenebri began to understand the true cost of their invasion. Their soldiers, who had once been undefeatable, found themselves trapped in human ambushes. Their war machines, though mighty, began to fall to human ingenuity. Humanity didn't have the advanced weaponry of the Dominion, but they had something else. They had a hunger for vengeance. They had the will to fight until every last Tenebri invader was dead. Each battle, each victory, no matter how small, fueled their desire to push back the Tenebri. Every Dominion fleet that was destroyed, every ground invasion repelled, gave them hope that Earth might yet survive. But the price was steep. The war turned Earth into a wasteland. Entire continents were rendered uninhabitable. Every battle, every counterattack left more scars on the planet. The air was thick with the stench of burning cities. The oceans were poisoned by chemical weapons and nuclear fallout. The skies, once blue and clear, were now covered in a thick layer of ash, casting a perpetual twilight over the land. But still, humanity fought on. Then, one day, the unthinkable happened. The Dominion retreated. It was not out of mercy, not out of pity. The Tenebri had underestimated humanity's resolve. They had never faced an enemy that would not surrender, never faced a species that would rather die than bow to their conquerors. The Dominion pulled back not because they feared defeat, but because they could not sustain the costs of a war that seemed to have no end. The Tenebri had faced thousands of species before, had destroyed them all with ease. But humanity was different. They had become a force unto themselves, a relentless storm that would never cease. The Dominion's decision to leave Earth was not victory for humanity, not yet. It was simply the beginning of something darker. Earth was left in ruins. Humanity had learned something vital. They would not be conquered. Humanity was no longer just a species. They had become something else, something new. The war had shaped them, transformed them into a singular, unstoppable force. They were no longer bound by the frailties of their former selves. They were warriors, forged in fire, made for war. And they had tasted victory, even if it had come at the cost of everything they had ever known. The survivors of Earth did not rebuild. They did not seek peace. They sought vengeance. They sought justice. They sought the downfall of the Dominion. They sought the end of their tormentors. The war had only just begun. Humanity's story was no longer one of simple survival. It had evolved into something much darker, something shaped by the relentless conflict with the Tenebrae. The war that had begun as an improbable fight for survival had transformed Earth into a brutal furnace where the human spirit was forged into something unrecognizable. As Earth smoldered under the weight of the Dominion's wrath, the survivors, those who had escaped the carnage of the first and second years of the invasion, refused to give up. They had lost everything: homes, families, entire cities. Yet their hatred burned brighter than ever. Humanity's fight for vengeance began not with victory but with desperation. In the ruins of Earth's greatest cities, the few survivors gathered, scavenging for anything they could use to fight back. The first efforts were crude: makeshift weapons, primitive traps, and scavenged energy cells that powered the last remaining defense systems. But the more humanity fought, the more they learned. They adapted at an incredible rate. The scattered resistance cells, once uncoordinated and chaotic, slowly began to form into something greater. They joined forces, working together, united in their hatred for the invaders who had torn their world apart. As Earth lay in ruins, scientists worked tirelessly in hidden laboratories, delving into the remnants of Dominion technology. They took apart every wrecked ship, every broken weapon, and reverse-engineered it, adapting and improving it with the ingenuity that had once seen humanity land on the moon. Human engineers learned to bend the technology of the Tenebrae to their will, turning alien war machines into tools of destruction for their own forces. The very weapons that had nearly wiped them from existence were now the tools of their vengeance. By the end of the second year of the war, the Tenebrae had underestimated their enemies in ways they had never anticipated. High Lord Vazir, the commander of the Sovereign Hand, had expected Earth to be a swift conquest, but humanity's refusal to succumb had left him perplexed. What had once been an empire so powerful that it had dismissed as nothing more than prey was now locked in a war of attrition with a race they had dismissed as nothing more than prey. And for the first time they began to feel the strain. While the Tenebrae controlled the skies and the surface was burned with kinetic bombardments, humanity fought an insurgent war from below. The people of Earth, their numbers decimated by the Dominion's overwhelming assault, found new ways to engage the enemy. They used the rubble of their ruined cities to hide, setting up ambushes that would cripple the Tenebrae's war machines. They learned the weaknesses of Dominion troops, how to sabotage their weapon systems, how to plant deadly traps in the dark corners of the war-torn world. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting to break the Dominion's grip on the galaxy, to send a message that would echo across the stars. The first sign of a true shift in the war came in the third year. After months of brutal fighting, the Tenebrae found themselves fighting not only on Earth but across several of their occupied planets. What began as isolated skirmishes on Earth became full-fledged rebellions on Dominion worlds. Freed slaves, former subjugated species, and even Tenebrae defectors began to rise against their masters. They had seen what humanity could do, how the human will could not be broken. The flames of rebellion once thought impossible spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Humanity's reach began to extend beyond Earth. They had built fleets of warships from the wreckage of the Dominion's armada, and now they were using them to strike back at the Dominion itself. Planets that had once belonged to the Tenebrae Empire began to fall, one by one. Rebellious factions banded together under the banner of humanity's vengeance, rallying behind the promise of freedom. With each victory, humanity became a symbol, a force of liberation in the galaxy. The Dominion tried to counterattack, sending their greatest warships into the fray, but they had grown complacent. They had not expected this kind of warfare. The Tenebri relied on their overwhelming strength, their technological superiority, and their ability to crush any resistance. What they had never accounted for was the relentlessness of humanity. The humans fought in ways the Dominion had never seen before. Guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and asymmetric warfare that turned the Dominion's own strengths against them. As the years passed, humanity's reputation grew. What had once been a mere nuisance became a plague. The whispers spread across the stars. Species that had once been too afraid to act against the Dominion began to rally, inspired by the humanity they saw tearing apart the once immovable empire. These new alliances, these new armies of freedom fighters, began to coordinate with humanity's forces. The Tenebri found themselves fighting a multi-front war not just on Earth, but across an ever-growing swath of the galaxy. The Tenebri, once the unquestioned rulers of the cosmos, began to fracture. Their once unified empire crumbled under the weight of the rebellion. High Lord Vazir, realizing the depth of the crisis, summoned his war councils, seeking ways to regain control. But the damage was already done. Humanity had sparked a fire in the galaxy, and now every corner of space was alight with the flames of rebellion. Despite the damage, the Dominion was still powerful. Their war fleets had not been shattered completely, and their warlords were still ruthless. But humanity had become something else. The last remnants of Earth's forces had been tempered in the crucible of their world's destruction. They were no longer the fragile species that had once looked to the stars in wonder. They had become conquerors in their own right. But the war was far from over. While humanity had dealt severe blows to the Tenebri, there was still much left to do. The Dominion would not fall easily. Their war machines were vast, and their empire stretched across countless worlds. To defeat the Tenebri, humanity would need to destroy not only their military might, but the heart of their empire itself. It was during this period of escalation that humanity made its final move. They gathered their forces, their ships, their weapons, and their allies. Together they would strike at the very heart of the Dominion. The target was Velkar Prime, the capital of the Tenebri Empire, a world that had stood as the symbol of their dominance for millennia. The final assault was swift and brutal. It was unlike any war humanity had ever fought. The fleets of freedom fighters, led by humanity's new warlords, arrived at the outskirts of the system, their ships blazing like stars in the night sky. The Dominion, knowing what was coming, gathered every warship, every soldier, and every weapon they had to defend their homeworld. But even they could not stop the relentless tide that was humanity's vengeance. The battle for Velkar Prime was brutal. Waves of human warships crashed against the Dominion's defenses, overwhelming them with sheer numbers and ferocity. The Dominion's advanced technology, once the pinnacle of power, was no match for the savage ingenuity of the human forces. It was not a battle of technology. It was a battle of wills. And humanity's will was stronger than any weapon the Dominion possessed. As the battle raged on, the humans breached Velkar Prime's atmosphere. The Tenebri had fought to defend their capital, but their soldiers were scattered and broken. The once immovable empire was now just a shadow of its former self, and the humans were at its doorstep. High Lord Vazir watched in horror as his world fell apart. The mighty Dominion, the empire that had crushed so many, was now crumbling under the weight of the very species it had sought to exterminate. His soldiers were dying, his fleets were in disarray, his empire was in ruins. And then, amidst the chaos, humanity struck the final blow. A missile launched from a human warship, powered by technologies scavenged from the wreckage of the Dominion's own armada, hit the heart of Velkar Prime's capital city. The explosion was deafening. The city was reduced to rubble in an instant. High Lord Vazir, surrounded by the wreckage of his empire, could do nothing but watch as the last remnants of his world were erased. With Velkar Prime's fall, the Dominion was no more. The last Tenebri had been defeated, their empire shattered, their power broken. The galaxy, once ruled by the Tenebri's iron fist, was free. Humanity had won. The war was over. But the victory came at a cost. Earth was still scarred and the galaxy had been forever changed. Humanity, once seen as a fragile species, was now the most feared force in the cosmos. The galaxy whispered their name in fear. And as they looked to the stars, humanity knew that this was only the beginning. The Tenebri had been defeated, but there were still countless worlds to protect, countless enemies to face, and the galaxy would never forget the war that had shaken it to its core. Humanity had become the ultimate force of nature, and they would not stop. The defeat of the Tenebri was just the beginning. The galaxy, once a place of order under the Dominion's crushing heel, was now a fractured and chaotic expanse, a place where power vacuums and new tensions were brewing. The end of the Tenebri's reign did not herald the dawn of peace. It was merely the first chapter in an ongoing struggle for control. Once humanity had tasted victory, but the galaxy was vast, and their enemies were not all gone. In the wake of the Dominion's collapse, new factions began to rise, some bent on revenge, others seeking to fill the vacuum left by the Tenebri's destruction. The struggle for the galaxy's future was only beginning, and humanity was now at the center of it. Earth, scarred and broken, had become a symbol of resilience. Despite the ruinous toll the war had taken, humanity had managed to stand tall. The survivors had rebuilt in the aftermath, reconstructing cities and pulling together the remnants of a society that had been nearly obliterated. Yet even as they struggled to regain some semblance of normalcy, they knew the fight wasn't over. The Dominion's defeat had sent ripples across the galaxy, and those who had once been allies or subjugated by the Tenebri now saw humanity as a rising power, one to either ally with or conquer. In the wake of destruction, power was like a currency, valuable, volatile, and capable of shifting the balance of the entire universe. The Council of Earth was formed, a united body of military leaders, scientists, former civilians, and survivors from all walks of life, tasked with deciding humanity's future. It was a difficult process, for the scars of the war still ran deep. Many still carried the grief of lost loved ones, the trauma of witnessing their cities fall to alien bombs. Yet there was a shared resolve. Humanity would not just survive. It would thrive. The survivors, now shaped by years of war, had no intention of returning to the weak, fractured species they once were. They had become warriors in the true sense of the word, adaptable, relentless, and capable of surviving in the darkest of times. The first test of humanity's new power came when they faced a coalition of ex-imperial allies, species once subjugated under the Tenebri's banner, who saw Earth's rise as a threat to their own ambitions. They were not content to simply stand by while the balance of power shifted so drastically. These new factions formed from the remnants of Dominion-controlled systems, species that had been broken and enslaved, their freedom fought for but not yet secured. They had been ruled for so long by the iron hand of the Tenebri that the idea of self-rule was foreign to them. They had no desire to embrace the chaos of freedom, but rather sought to recreate the structure of dominance, albeit with themselves in control. A new war, smaller in scale but no less brutal, ignited when a coalition of these factions attacked the fringes of human-controlled space. They saw humanity's burgeoning power as a direct challenge to their own survival and wealth. These factions had grown accustomed to the stability that the Tenebri had provided, even if that stability came at the cost of their autonomy. They had accepted being subjects of the Dominion because it meant peace, albeit under harsh rule. The idea of humanity, an unknown species, taking the lead in this new galactic order was unacceptable. The initial clashes were brutal. Humanity's ships, though powerful, were not as numerous as those of the former Dominion allies. These factions had entire fleets of warships, many of which had been repurposed from Dominion stock. The first skirmishes were fought in the dark corners of space, in the asteroid belts and barren moons that dotted the galaxy's outer rim. The factions sent their best forces, hoping to put an end to the human uprising before it could truly begin. The battle for supremacy was like a fire that spread from star system to star system, slowly growing in intensity as more and more factions joined the fray. But humanity once more surprised their enemies. The survivors from Earth had become experts in unconventional warfare. They knew the importance of the element of surprise, of using the environment to their advantage. The human warships, often smaller and more agile than their larger counterparts, could maneuver in ways that even the largest of the Dominion war machines couldn't match. It wasn't just about sheer power. It was about ingenuity, adaptability, and exploiting weaknesses. It was a war of attrition, but humanity had no shortage of resolve. The fact that they had already survived an almost unimaginable war against the Tenebri gave them an edge in the way they fought. These new enemies were no more than a minor inconvenience compared to the absolute destruction they had withstood in the past. The battles were fierce, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. However, humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to regroup and adapt. The humans began to turn the tide, using the knowledge gleaned from the Tenebri to create new weapons, defenses, and tactics. They were not simply defending, they were striking back with force. The factions began to realize they had underestimated humanity yet again. They had thought Earth's forces would be as disorganized as they had been before the Tenebri's downfall, but instead they encountered a unified, highly skilled force that was capable of outmaneuvering them at every turn. The turning point in the war came when the humans, working with their new allies from the former Dominion-controlled worlds, launched a daring strike against one of the most powerful of these rival factions, the Zorkai Alliance. The Zorkai had been one of the Tenebri's most loyal allies, and their war machines were still some of the most advanced in the galaxy. The battle was a cataclysmic clash that saw entire fleets of ships erupting into flames, turning the void into a chaotic and beautiful display of destruction. It was a battle of wills, but humanity had learned the art of war through years of relentless fighting. The Zorkai fleet, once considered invincible, was shattered, and their forces were forced to retreat. It was a significant victory, one that would forever alter the course of the war. But even in victory, the humans knew that their fight was far from over. The galaxy was still a battleground, and their enemies were relentless. While they had struck a major blow to the Zorkai, there were still many factions who viewed humanity as an upstart, a new power in a galaxy that had long been ruled by the strong. The remnants of the Dominion's former allies were still scattered throughout the galaxy, each seeking to carve out their own place, their own power. The human victory was just a beginning. The galaxy was still a dangerous and unpredictable place, and no one knew what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was clear: humanity had proven its worth. In the span of a few short years, they had gone from a struggling, war-torn species to one capable of holding its own against some of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. They had carved out a place for themselves among the stars, and they were not going to give it up easily. The war had changed them. It had forged them into something new, something that would not bow to anyone. They had risen from the ashes of their own destruction, and now the galaxy would see what humanity could truly do. Despite the dangers and the looming threats, humanity's will was stronger than ever. As the last remnants of the Dominion crumbled, the survivors from Earth stood ready to face whatever came next. They had learned the hard way that peace was a fleeting thing, that the galaxy was a place where only the strongest survived. But humanity had proven its strength. They had faced the greatest threat the universe had ever known, and they had come out on top. They had become more than just survivors. They had become a force of nature, and they would not stop. The galaxy would whisper humanity's name in fear, not because they were weak, but because they had learned the true meaning of strength. And in the end, that would be their greatest weapon. Humanity's rise in the galaxy, while undeniable, had not been without its costs. The defeat of the Tenebri and the fracturing of their empire had left a power vacuum that was not easily filled. Many galactic factions, once content under the dominance of the Tenebri, now sought to establish their own claims to power. The remnants of the Dominion, as well as those who had fought alongside it, remained scattered across the stars, unwilling to let go of the dream of dominance that had once been theirs. The war with the Tenebri had only been the first stage in a much larger conflict. and humanity was quickly realizing that they were now at the center of it all. As the war against the Tenebri drew to a close, the survivors on Earth celebrated, though it was a muted celebration. They had won, yes, but the galaxy had not yet been fully reshaped. The once great empires that had allied themselves with the Dominion were not about to let their defeat pass quietly. They had resources, technology, and fleets, everything needed to challenge humanity's newly gained power. And while humanity had won the battle for Earth, there was still the entire galaxy to consider. The first signs of discontent came from the fringe systems, worlds that had once been part of the Dominion's vast network of colonies. These systems had never fully embraced the idea of independence, and to a large extent they had only been kept in line by the iron grip of the Tenebri. With the fall of their overlords, these worlds began to consider their own futures, and they quickly realized that a new player had emerged. Humanity's military success, its ability to push back the Tenebri, had earned it a reputation. But not all who witnessed it saw this as a symbol of hope. Many saw it as a threat. The political and military leaders on Earth knew that they could not afford to sit idly by as these new tensions brewed. They had to act swiftly and decisively. As the Council of Earth, made up of leaders from every corner of the globe, worked tirelessly to establish a foothold in the galaxy, humanity's fleet began to mobilize. There was no time to waste. If they were to ensure their continued survival and growth, they needed to consolidate their power and prevent these rising factions from creating a new galactic order that excluded them. The first mission was one of diplomacy, an attempt to stabilize the regions closest to Earth. This was not a task for military force, not yet anyway. But it quickly became apparent that even the most diplomatic of missions had a volatile undercurrent. Humanity's representatives found themselves facing skepticism and hostility at nearly every turn. Their presence in the galaxy was resented, and many of the former Dominion-linked factions were not keen on allowing them to expand their influence. While some of the smaller species who had been liberated by humanity during the war with the Tenebri were willing to form alliances, others were wary. The political landscape was in disarray, and the struggle for control was no longer about resisting the Tenebri. It was about who would inherit the galaxy now that the Dominion had fallen.